Port Moresby, New Guinea, January 15th, 1943. Captain William Benn's B-25 Mitchell pulled up hard from 7,000 feet, his bombardier calling out the drop. 4 500-pound bombs fell toward a Japanese transport steaming below. Benn watched them tumble, calculating wind, target speed, altitude. The mathematics seemed perfect. All 4 bombs missed by 300 yards. Benn's squadron had flown 42 missions against Japanese shipping in the previous 6 months. They had scored exactly 3 direct hits, a 7% success rate, sometimes lower. The mathematics were brutal and consistent. Conventional level bombing from altitude could not reliably hit moving ships. Japanese convoy commanders knew this. Their confidence in evasive maneuvers and weather had been validated by every failed Allied bombing attempt across the Southwest Pacific. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Japanese naval intelligence did not know, could not know from observing those failed high-altitude attacks, was that 500 miles south, a 52-year-old former Navy Chief Petty Officer named Paul Irvin Gunn had spent 6 months perfecting a bombing technique that would render every assumption about bomber effectiveness obsolete. A technique so simple in concept, so devastating in execution, that it would turn medium bombers into precision weapons, capable of hitting from 50 feet, with accuracy rates 7 times higher than conventional methods. The Japanese had built their entire convoy defense doctrine on one fundamental truth: bombers attacking from altitude missed. Their mathematics were sound, their observations were accurate. Their conclusion was fatal, because Allied aircrew were no longer attacking from altitude. Rabaul, December 1942. Japanese naval staff officers reviewed Allied bomber effectiveness reports with satisfaction. American B-17 flying fortresses had attacked 17 convoys in the previous 4 months. Hit rate, 4.2%. Australian Beaufort bombers had fared worse, 2.8% against shipping. Even the feared B-24 Liberators managed only 6% accuracy on their best days. Commander Masatake Okumura, staff officer for the Southeast Area Fleet, compiled the statistics in his daily reports. Of 147 bombs dropped at Japanese shipping in November alone, 6 had struck targets, 4%. The numbers told a consistent story. Level bombing from medium to high altitude could not reliably hit maneuvering vessels. Ships changed course randomly. Wind drift affected bomb trajectories. Altitude created time for evasive action. The mathematics favored the defender overwhelmingly. Japanese doctrine reflected this reality. Convoy formations spread ships apart. Destroyers maintained anti-aircraft stations at maximum range. Captains trained crews in evasive patterns, zigzag courses, speed changes. The system worked. Convoys reached their destinations. Losses to air attack remained minimal, acceptable. Tokyo's planners authorized increasingly ambitious operations. The Southwest Pacific sea lanes remained open. Imperial Navy training manuals dedicated 3 pages to defending against torpedo bombers, 12 pages to coordinating fighter cover, half a page to level bombing defense. The threat assessment seemed accurate. Torpedo attacks required aircraft to approach low and slow, vulnerable to every gun on the ship. Fighter sweeps could be countered with zeros, but level bombers attacking from 7,000 feet or higher posed minimal danger. Let them drop their loads. Let them photograph the misses. The ships would continue. What these reports did not capture, could not capture, was the frustration building among Allied aircrew. Men who trained for months, who risked their lives on 8-hour missions, who watched their bombs splash harmlessly into the ocean, hundreds of yards from targets. The mathematics of conventional bombing were simple and devastating. A bomb dropped from 7,000 feet fell for approximately 20 seconds. A ship traveling at 12 knots moved 400 feet in those 20 seconds. Wind could push the bomb 200 feet off course. The bombardier had to predict where the ship would be, compensate for wind, account for altitude, temperature, bomb ballistics. The margin for error was enormous. The hit rate reflected that reality. Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence McCallum, intelligence officer for the 5th Air Force, compiled his own statistics in November 1942. His conclusions were grim. Against stationary targets, B-25s achieved 28% accuracy. Against moving ships, 4%. The bombing doctrine wasn't working. The aircraft were capable. The crews were trained. The mathematics were impossible. McCallum's report reached General George Kenny's desk on December 3rd. Kenny read it twice. Then he called a meeting with every bomber squadron commander in the 5th Air Force. The question was simple. How do we hit moving ships? The conventional answer, attack from higher altitude with bigger bombs, had failed. Kenny wanted unconventional solutions. What Kenny didn't know yet was that the solution already existed. A former enlisted man named Pappy Gunn had been experimenting with a technique the Navy had used against German vessels in the North Atlantic, a technique called skip bombing. Fly low, very low. Release bombs at masthead height. Let physics do the rest. Port Moresby, August 1942, 4 months earlier. Pappy Gunn stood beside a wrecked Douglas A-20 Havoc, measuring blast damage. The aircraft had attempted a low-level strafing run against a Japanese position. Successful attack, but the nose-mounted guns had been modified, incorrectly. Muzzle blast from the 20mm cannon had peeled skin plating off the fuselage. The modification had worked. The installation had failed. Gunn had been solving these problems since the Philippines fell. His wife and children were imprisoned at Santo Tomas. His engineering background was Navy aviation, 2 decades of fixing what shouldn't work, making what couldn't work function anyway. When Kenny arrived to command the 5th Air Force in July 1942, he found Gunn already modifying aircraft in direct violation of technical orders, installing guns where bombardier positions used to be, stripping out unnecessary equipment, adding armor plate, field modifications that worked. Kenny recognized talent when he saw it. He gave Gunn unofficial authorization to experiment, modify whatever needed modifying, solve the problems technical manuals said were impossible. By September, Gunn had transformed a dozen A-20 Havocs into strafer gunships, 4 50-caliber machine guns in the nose, forward-firing weapons that could suppress anti-aircraft positions before releasing bombs. The concept worked. The execution needed refinement. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Squadron leader William Garing, Royal Australian Air Force, mentioned a technique British Coastal Command had used against German shipping: approach at wave-top height, release bombs from 200 feet at maximum speed. The bomb would skip across water like a stone, striking the ship at or below the waterline. Simple physics. Devastating effect. Garing had seen gun camera footage. British Bristol Beaufort torpedo bombers modified for skip bombing had achieved hit rates approaching 40%, 4 times better than conventional attacks. The technique required precision flying and nerves that could handle approaching a ship at masthead height while anti-aircraft fire filled the air. But it worked. Gunn studied the concept for 3 days. Then he found Kenny and explained what skip bombing could do. The bomb, released at 200 feet, would maintain forward momentum. It would hit water traveling 300 miles per hour. The impact angle would cause it to skip, like a stone thrown across a pond. 1 skip, sometimes 2. Then impact against the ship's hull, at the waterline, where armor was thinnest, where a detonation would flood compartments faster than damage control could respond. The technique eliminated most variables that made conventional bombing ineffective. No need to calculate where the ship would be in 20 seconds. The bomber would be 200 feet away when the bomb was released. Wind drift became irrelevant at that range. The pilot aimed the aircraft like a gun, released at the right moment. The bomb either hit or missed by yards, not hundreds of yards. Kenny authorized immediate testing. Gunn selected the SS Pruth as the target, a merchant freighter that had run aground on a reef outside Port Moresby in 1924. Rusted hulk, perfect for practice. Gunn's crews would fly hundreds of practice runs against that wreck over the next 4 months, learning the technique, perfecting the approach, calculating the exact moment of release. The first test run was December 8, 1942. Captain Ed Larner piloted a B-25 Mitchell at 300 feet, approaching the Pruth head-on. At 600 yards, he dropped to 50 feet. At 300 yards, masthead height. He could see rust stains on the wreck's superstructure. Anti-aircraft crews on a real ship would be firing by now. Lana held steady. At 200 feet, he released. 4 500-pound bombs, standard demolition loads. The first bomb hit water, skipped once, struck the Pruth amidships. The second bomb followed identical trajectory. The third skipped twice before impact. The fourth missed, skipping over the wreck entirely. 3 hits out of 4, 75% accuracy, against a stationary target, granted. But 75%. Lana pulled up hard, clearing the wreck's mast by less than 30 feet. His co-pilot was laughing. It had worked. Over the next 6 weeks, 5th Air Force crews flew 214 practice runs against the Pruth. They experimented with approach angles, release points, bomb loads. They discovered that delayed fuses were critical. A bomb with an instantaneous fuse would detonate on water impact, wasting its energy. But a 5-second delay allowed the bomb to punch through hull plating before detonation. The explosion, contained by the ship's structure, would cause catastrophic internal damage. They learned that approach altitude mattered. Too high, and anti-aircraft fire would be devastating. Too low, and the pilot couldn't see the target until too late. 50 feet was optimal, masthead height, low enough to avoid most defensive fire, high enough to maintain visual contact. They learned that release point was critical. Too far out, the bomb lost momentum before impact. Too close, and the pilot couldn't pull up in time. 200 feet became standard. Close enough for accuracy. Far enough for safe escape. The statistics from those practice runs told a revolutionary story. Against the stationary Pruth, crews achieved 68% hit rates. Some pilots exceeded 80%. The best crews could place 3 bombs out of 4 exactly where they wanted them. The mathematics had changed completely. Conventional bombing from altitude, 4 to 7%. Skip bombing from masthead height, 68%. Nearly 10 times more effective. But the Pruth didn't shoot back. It didn't maneuver. It didn't have anti-aircraft guns filling the air with steel. The real test would come against Japanese ships whose crews knew Allied bombers were attacking. Ships that would turn, accelerate, fill the sky with defensive fire. Would skip bombing work under combat conditions, or would the technique that looked perfect in practice fail when faced with actual opposition? Kenny assembled his staff in January 1943 to review the test results. The numbers were undeniable. Skip bombing worked, but it required modifications to the aircraft. Standard B-25s carried bombs in internal bays, released by bombardiers using complex sighting systems. Skip bombing needed the pilot to aim the entire aircraft. No bombardier, no complicated calculations, just pilot skill and timing. More critically, skip bombing required suppressing defensive fire. An aircraft approaching at masthead height presented a perfect target for every machine gun on the ship. Japanese destroyer crews trained constantly on anti-aircraft gunnery. At 200 feet, they couldn't miss, unless they were already dead or diving for cover when the bomber arrived. This was where Pappy Gunn's earlier experiments became critical. His strafer modifications, adding forward-firing machine guns where bombardier positions used to be, gave attacking bombers the ability to suppress defenders. 8 50-caliber machine guns firing simultaneously produced 6,000 rounds per minute. Enough firepower to sweep a ship's deck clean, enough to destroy anti-aircraft gun positions, enough to kill everyone caught in the open. The combination of strafer modifications and skip bombing created a devastating weapons system. Approach at masthead height, open fire with all forward guns at 600 yards. Suppress defensive positions, kill gunners, destroy fire control systems. At 200 feet, release bombs while defensive fire was still disrupted. Pull up hard. Clear the target. Let the bombs do their work. Guns modification teams worked through December and January, converting every available B-25. They stripped out bombardier positions, installed solid noses packed with machine guns, added blister packs on the fuselage sides for additional guns, reinforced structures to handle the recoil, extended blast tubes past propeller arcs to prevent muzzle flash damage. Each modification solved problems that technical manuals said were impossible. By February 1943, the 5th Air Force had 37 modified B-25 strafers, crews trained specifically for skip bombing. Each pilot had flown at least 10 practice runs against the Pruth. Most had flown 20 or more. They knew the technique. They understood the risks. They believed it would work. Japanese naval intelligence knew none of this. Their reports continued showing Allied bomber ineffectiveness. 4% hit rates, 5% on good days. The convoys kept running. The sea lanes stayed open. Japanese confidence remained absolute. Why would it change? Every observation confirmed their assessments. Allied bombers couldn't hit moving ships. The mathematics were clear. What Japanese observers didn't see was the training happening 500 miles south. They didn't know about the Pruth, riddled with holes from hundreds of practice bombs. They didn't know about Pappy Guns modifications, turning medium bombers into strafer gunships. They didn't know about skip bombing or the 75% hit rates crews were achieving in practice. They knew what their experience had taught them. Bombers attacked from altitude and missed. The Japanese Navy's defensive doctrine, built on accurate observations and sound mathematics, was about to encounter a technique that rendered every assumption obsolete. A technique so simple that British crews had been using it for months in the Atlantic, so effective that Allied commanders wondered why they hadn't adopted it earlier. So devastating that once demonstrated in combat, it would force Japan to abandon daylight convoy operations entirely. But first, it had to be proven. The Pruth couldn't shoot back. Japanese destroyers would. Townsville, Australia, January 28, 1943. Major Ed Larner briefed his squadron on their next mission. Intelligence reports showed a Japanese convoy assembling at Rabaul. 8 transports, 8 destroyer escorts. Destination, Lae, New Guinea. Expected departure, late February. This would be the first full-scale test of skip bombing under combat conditions. Larner had flown more practice runs against the Pruth than any other pilot. 43 approaches, 38 hits, 88% accuracy against a stationary target. He understood the technique better than anyone except Pappy Gun himself. He also understood the risks. Japanese destroyers carried enough anti-aircraft firepower to fill the sky with steel. Approaching at masthead height meant flying through that defensive fire for 600 yards, nearly 2 miles, 20 seconds of exposure, 20 seconds when every gun on every ship would be aiming at his aircraft. The mathematics were brutal but calculable. A B-25 flying at 300 miles per hour covered 600 yards in 7 seconds. 7 seconds from opening fire to bomb release. 7 seconds of maximum danger. But those 7 seconds would occur while 8 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns suppressed every anti-aircraft position they could reach. The defensive gunners would be fighting for their lives, not aiming carefully at the approaching bomber. Larner's briefing emphasized one critical point. Stay low. Very low. Japanese anti-aircraft directors were designed for high-altitude targets. Their heavy guns couldn't depress low enough to engage aircraft at masthead height. Only light machine guns would be effective, and those gunners would be dead before they could fire. Assuming the strafer modifications worked as advertised, the squadron spent 2 weeks refining their approach. They studied reconnaissance photographs of Japanese destroyers, identifying anti-aircraft positions, gun directors on the bridge, 25mm mounts along the rails, machine gun nests aft of the funnel. Each position would receive concentrated fire from approaching strafers. No defensive position would be left unmolested. They practiced coordination, multiple aircraft attacking simultaneously from different angles, force the defenders to choose which threat to engage, overload their response capacity. By the time gunners swung their weapons toward one attacker, another would already be releasing bombs. The technique required precise timing, required trust, required accepting that some aircraft would be hit, but the mathematics favored the attackers. 37 strafers against 8 destroyers, 4-to-1 advantage. Overwhelming force applied precisely. Lieutenant William Benn, the same pilot who had missed by 300 yards in January, flew his 22nd practice run against the Pruth on February 15th. His approach was textbook perfect, 50 feet altitude, 300 miles per hour, forward guns firing at 600 yards, release at 200 feet, 4 bombs, 4 hits, 100% accuracy. Benn had found religion. Skip bombing worked. The only question remaining was whether it would work when the target shot back. February 28, 1943. Intelligence confirmed the Japanese convoy had departed Rabaul. 8 transports as predicted, 8 destroyer escorts. Course, southeast toward Lae. Speed, 10 knots. The convoy would be vulnerable to air attack on March 3rd as it crossed the Bismarck Sea. Weather forecasts predicted broken cloud cover, visibility sufficient for visual approach. Conditions were optimal. Kenny assembled every available bomber. 37 B-25 strafers for skip bombing, 13 Australian Beaufighters for anti-aircraft suppression, 12 B-17 flying fortresses for high-altitude distraction. The strafers would deliver the killing blows. The other aircraft would ensure they reached their targets safely. The largest coordinated airstrike yet attempted in the Southwest Pacific. All of it built on a technique that had been proven only against a stationary wreck. The aircrew knew the statistics. 68% hit rate in practice. 37 strafers carrying 4 bombs each. 148 bombs total. If practice accuracy held under combat conditions, 100 hits against 8 transports. The mathematics were overwhelming, but practice wasn't combat. Stationary targets didn't fire back. Japanese destroyer crews were veterans of Guadalcanal. They had survived battles that destroyed other ships. They knew how to fight. What the Japanese couldn't know, was that the rules had changed, that bombers were no longer attacking from safe altitude, that the 4% hit rates they had observed for months were about to become 70%, that 8 forward-firing machine guns would arrive before the bombs, that skip bombing turned medium bombers into precision weapons, that every assumption their defensive doctrine was built upon was obsolete. The convoy steamed southeast through calm seas. Crews maintained watch. Officers calculated arrival times. Soldiers below decks wrote letters home. Everything routine, everything according to plan, everything about to change. Because 500 miles south, 37 modified B-25s were being armed with 5-second delayed fuses and full ammunition loads for 8 forward-firing guns. Crews were briefing on approach altitudes and release points. Mechanics were checking every system twice. The technique had been proven in practice. Now it would be proven in combat, against targets that would maneuver, fight back, refuse to die easily. The mathematics said it would work. 75% hit rates against the Pruth, maybe 60% against maneuvering ships. Still 10 times better than conventional bombing, still overwhelming, still enough to destroy every ship in the convoy. If the technique worked, if the crews executed perfectly, if Japanese defensive fire didn't prove as deadly as feared. Captain Ed Larner checked his aircraft one final time that evening. 8 50-caliber machine guns in the nose, 4 500-pound bombs with delayed fuses, full fuel load, every system green. He had flown 43 practice runs against the Pruth. Tomorrow he would fly his 44th against a Japanese destroyer. The difference was everything. The technique was the same. Japanese lookouts scanned empty skies. Radar operators had no equipment to warn them. Convoy commanders believed their experience. Bombers attacked from altitude, bombs missed by hundreds of yards. The mathematics were proven. Tomorrow would be routine, another convoy delivery, another successful transit, another confirmation that their defensive doctrine worked. They were wrong. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Bismarck Sea, March 3, 1943, 1000 hours. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura stood on Shirayuki's bridge, watching B-17 flying fortresses circle at 7,000 feet. His destroyers opened fire. Anti-aircraft shells burst around the bombers in familiar patterns. Black puffs filled the sky. The B-17s maintained altitude. Bomb bay doors opened. Bombs fell. Kimura watched them tumble. 20 seconds of falling. His ships had already changed course. The bombs splashed into water 300 yards from the nearest transport. Near misses, no damage. Exactly as expected. The convoy maintained formation. His crews had performed perfectly. The bombers circled once more, then departed. Routine engagement, predictable outcome. What Kimura couldn't see, 3 miles distant at wavetop height, would arrive in 7 minutes. Major Ed Lana led the first wave of B-25 strafers toward the convoy at 50 feet. Water spray from his prop wash trailed behind. His co-pilot called out range, 1,000 yards, 800. The Japanese ships grew larger in his windscreen. He could see individual men on the destroyer's deck, 600 yards. He armed all 8 forward guns. The Japanese gunners were still tracking the high-altitude B-17s. Their attention focused upward. Standard defensive posture, sound tactics, fatal mistake. At 600 yards, Lana opened fire. 8 50 caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously. Tracer rounds arced toward Shirayuki's bridge. The recoil felt like hitting a wall. His airspeed indicator dropped 5 miles per hour from drag, but the tracers walked across water, up the destroyer's hull, across the deck. Glass shattered. Metal sparked. Men fell. Japanese gunners swung their weapons toward this new threat. Too late. The strafers' concentrated firepower swept the deck clean. Anti-aircraft positions went silent before defenders could return fire. Fire control systems disappeared in showers of sparks. Officers on the bridge dove for cover as 50 caliber rounds punched through thin steel plating. 300 yards. Lana's bombardier began the count. 200 yards. Release. 4 500-pound bombs left the aircraft. Lana pulled up hard. His co-pilot glimpsed the destroyer's mainmast 30 feet below their tail. The first bomb hit water traveling 300 miles per hour. Impact angle caused it to skip, like a stone thrown across a pond. 1 bounce, 200 feet. Second bounce. The bomb struck Shirayuki amidships at the waterline. 5-second delayed fuse. The bomb punched through hull plating, penetrated into the engine room, then detonated. The explosion occurred inside the ship's structure. Contained energy magnified destructive effect. Bulkheads blew outward. Steam lines ruptured. Water flooded in through the entry hole now enlarged by internal detonation. Shirayuki shuddered. Listed. Men poured onto deck. Lana's second bomb followed identical trajectory. Skip. Bounce. Impact. This one struck forward. The bow section collapsed. Lana's third bomb detonated in the destroyer's magazine. The ship disappeared in a massive explosion. Debris rained down across a quarter-mile radius. 7 seconds from opening fire to bomb release, 1 destroyer destroyed. Lana climbed away as the second wave approached. Lieutenant William Benn led 3 strafers toward transport Kyokusei-maru. His approach was textbook perfect. 50 feet altitude, 600 yards, open fire. The transport's deck erupted in chaos. Cargo crates exploded. Men ran for cover that didn't exist. Anti-aircraft positions went silent under concentrated machine gun fire. At 200 feet, Benn released his bomb load. 4 bombs. 4 skips. 3 hits. The mathematics from practice against the Pruth held under combat conditions. 75% accuracy. The first bomb struck Kyokusei-maru's engine room. Internal detonation destroyed propulsion. The ship went, dead in the water. Second bomb hit amidships in the troop compartment. 600 soldiers packed below decks. The explosion killed hundreds instantly. Third bomb struck the forward hold where ammunition was stored. Secondary detonations followed. Kyokusei-maru began sinking within 90 seconds of the first impact. Men jumped overboard. Lifeboats launched. But the attack wasn't finished. More waves of strafers approached. Each pilot had practiced this exact approach 40 times against the Pruth. Each pilot executed perfectly. Transport Teiomaru took 5 direct hits in 3 minutes. Fires broke out. Ammunition detonated. The ship capsized. Transport Nojima took 4 hits. Her back broke. Both sections sank within 10 minutes. Transport Ayomaru exploded when a bomb hit her fuel tanks. The blast could be seen from 30 miles away. Japanese destroyer captains tried to respond. They increased speed, changed course, activated smoke generators, standard evasive tactics. Tactics developed against high-altitude bombers that needed 20 seconds to reach the target. But the strafers weren't attacking from altitude. Course changes didn't matter when the bomber released from 200 feet. Smoke didn't help when the attack lasted 7 seconds. Destroyer Tokitsukaze attempted to maneuver while under attack. A strafer approached from her port side. The destroyer turned hard to starboard. Standard doctrine: present the smallest possible target, but the B-25 pilot simply adjusted his approach angle. At 600 yards, his forward guns opened fire. The destroyer's bridge disappeared under concentrated firepower. At 200 feet, he released. 3 bombs hit the destroyer's waterline. Tokitsukaze broke in half. Both sections sank within 5 minutes. The statistics from those first 15 minutes rewrote every assumption about bomber effectiveness. 37 strafers attacked, 148 bombs dropped, 93 direct hits, 63% accuracy, against maneuvering, fighting targets, under combat conditions. The practice against the Pruth had actually understated skip bombing's effectiveness. Admiral Kimura, wounded on Shirayuki's bridge before his flagship sank, transferred to destroyer Shikinami. From there, he watched his convoy disintegrate. 8 transports, all sinking or sunk, 4 destroyers destroyed, the remaining destroyers attempting rescue operations while under continuous air attack. New waves of strafers arriving every 20 minutes. The Japanese had no defense. Their anti-aircraft guns were designed for high-altitude threats. Heavy weapons couldn't depress low enough to engage aircraft at masthead height. Light machine guns were suppressed by forward-firing strafer guns before they could respond. Evasive maneuvers didn't matter when bombs were released from 200 feet. The defensive doctrine that had worked for 18 months was obsolete. Transport Shinai Maru took 6 hits while attempting to run for New Britain. Each bomb struck within 10 feet of intended impact point, precision that high-altitude bombing could never achieve. The transport sank stern first. 800 soldiers drowned. Transport Kembu Maru broke in half after 4 direct hits. Both sections sank before rescue vessels could approach. Transport Oigawa Maru, already burning from earlier strikes, received 3 more bombs. She capsized. Transport Taimei Maru, the last still moving under power, took 5 hits in 2 minutes. She went down with over 1,000 men aboard. By noon, all 8 transports had sunk. 6,900 troops had embarked at Rabaul. 5,700 died in the water. Some drowned immediately when ships sank, others died from exposure. Many were killed by strafing runs that targeted lifeboats. Controversial then, condemned now. But orders from 5th Air Force headquarters were explicit: deny Japan reinforcement by any means. The survivors, who eventually reached shore, numbered fewer than 1,200. They arrived without weapons, without equipment, without hope. The 51st Division's movement to Leh had been annihilated. Not defeated in battle, annihilated before firing a shot. Allied losses: 4 B-25s shot down, 13 aircrew killed. Against those numbers, 8 transports destroyed, 4 destroyers sunk, 2 more heavily damaged. The mathematics were overwhelming. The technique worked. Skip bombing had been proven in combat. Port Moresby, March 3rd, evening. General Kenny read the after-action reports in his operations room. The statistics seemed impossible. Yet gun camera footage confirmed everything. 93 direct hits out of 148 bombs. 63% accuracy. He had predicted 20%, maybe 30% on a perfect day, but 63% exceeded every expectation. The report included comparisons. High-altitude bombing by B-17s against the same convoy. 4 bombs dropped, 0 hits, 0%. The B-17s had served as distraction, pulling Japanese attention upward while strafers approached at wave-top height. Effective use, but harmless. The strafers had delivered every killing blow. Kenny underlined specific passages. Skip bombing eliminates calculation errors inherent in high-altitude attacks. Pilot aims aircraft like rifle. Release point determined by visual range, not mathematical prediction. Bomb either hits or misses by yards, not hundreds of yards. The technique's simplicity was its strength. No complex bomb sight, no calculations for wind, altitude, target speed, just pilot skill and timing. The report analyzed defensive response. Japanese anti-aircraft fire was ineffective against low-level attack. Heavy guns could not depress to engage targets at masthead height. Light weapons were suppressed by forward-firing strafer guns before they could respond. Evasive maneuvers proved futile when bombs were released from 200 feet. Traditional defensive doctrine offers no counter to skip bombing technique. Kenny wrote his assessment for Washington. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea demonstrates that medium bombers modified for skip bombing can destroy naval convoys with greater effectiveness than surface ships or submarines. Accuracy rates exceed conventional bombing by factor of 10. Japanese defenses designed for high-altitude threats are obsolete against low-level attack. Recommend immediate expansion of strafer modification program. Every B-25 in theater should be converted. Rabaul, March 4th. Commander Masatake Okumura compiled casualty reports with shaking hands. 6,900 troops embarked, 1,200 survived, 83% casualties. The numbers repeated in his mind, not battle casualties, not losses over months of campaign. 83% destroyed in 6 hours, complete annihilation of a reinforced division. The logistical catastrophe extended beyond personnel. 8 transports sunk meant 45,000 tons of shipping destroyed. Artillery pieces, ammunition, medical equipment, food supplies, all resting at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Japan's merchant marine could not replace losses at that rate. Every transport sunk reduced cargo capacity permanently. The convoy system that sustained Japan's perimeter had suffered catastrophic damage. Okumura's report to Tokyo included tactical analysis. Allied aircraft attacked at masthead height using technique that rendered all defensive measures ineffective. Bombs were released from estimated 200 feet range. Hit rates observed exceeded 60%. Traditional anti-aircraft defense cannot counter this threat. Heavy weapons cannot engage low-altitude targets. Light weapons are suppressed by concentrated forward-firing machine guns on attacking bombers. Evasive maneuvers provide no protection against bombs released at point-blank range. The report, and continued, recommend suspension of daylight convoy operations within range of Allied airfields. Alternative delivery methods required for future reinforcement operations. Current defensive doctrine obsolete against demonstrated Allied tactics. Tokyo's response was silence. No new convoys authorized, no reinforcements dispatched. Imperial General Headquarters acknowledged implicitly what they could not state explicitly. Japan had lost control of the Bismarck Sea. Skip bombing had accomplished what surface ships and submarines had failed to achieve. Complete interdiction of sea lanes. The strategic implications rippled outward. Leh garrison could not be reinforced by sea. Without reinforcement, Leh could not hold. Its fall would expose Salamaua. That would open the Huon Peninsula. Allied forces would advance up the northern coast of New Guinea. The entire defensive perimeter would collapse sequentially, all because one convoy failed to reach its destination, all because Allied bombers had adopted a technique that turned 4% hit rates into 63%. Lieutenant Sadao Takai, one of fewer than 200 soldiers who survived and eventually reached shore, wrote in his diary, "The ships exploded from bombs that came from nowhere. Aircraft flew so low we could see pilots' faces. Our anti-aircraft guns could not aim low enough. The destroyers tried to protect us, but they were dying too. In the water for 8 hours. Watched men drown, watched aircraft return and kill more men. No rescue came. We swam to New Britain. Half of us died on the way. The human cost extended beyond statistics. Entire units ceased to exist. The 51st Division lost 2/3 of its strength in one day. Support units vanished completely. Medical staff, engineers, communications personnel, replacements that Japan's shrinking manpower pool could not provide. Each soldier represented months of training, expensive equipment, scarce transport capacity, each loss compounded Japan's strategic deterioration. Washington, D.C., March 1943. News of the victory reached the highest levels. Roosevelt received briefings. Marshall studied reconnaissance photographs showing debris fields 50 miles long. Admiral King, commanding the U.S. Navy, read Kenny's report with particular interest. Air power had destroyed a naval convoy without surface ships involved. The implications for post-war force structure were profound, but the immediate impact mattered more. Allied planners revised their New Guinea strategy. Lae could be isolated, bypassed, left to wither. No need for costly frontal assaults. Air power would prevent reinforcement. Ground forces could advance past strong points. The strategy would be repeated throughout the Pacific. Rabaul, Truk, bypassed, isolated, starved. All because Japan could no longer move troops by sea within range of Allied airfields. The production statistics told the larger story. In March 1943, American factories produced 297 B-25s. Japanese factories produced 19 transport ships total. For every transport Japan built, America produced 15 bombers capable of sinking it. The arithmetic was simple, brutal, irreversible. Japan's perimeter would shrink because Japan could not move men across water without losing them to air attack. By April, 5th Air Force had converted every available B-25 to strafer configuration. 8 forward-firing guns became standard. Skip bombing became primary anti-shipping doctrine. Training against the Pruth continued. Every new crew flew minimum 20 practice runs before combat deployment. The technique that had been proven in the Bismarck Sea was now being systematized, refined, expanded. Japanese attempts to adapt came too late. Convoys began moving only at night. Ships dispersed rather than concentrating. Routes changed frequently. All measures reduced efficiency. Ships moving at night covered half the distance of daylight runs. Dispersed ships required more escorts. Changing routes meant longer voyages, consuming more fuel. The logistics network degraded steadily, not from single catastrophic failure, from cumulative inefficiency forced by Allied air superiority. Production imbalance grew worse. By mid-1943, American factories produced 500 combat aircraft per day, all types: fighters, bombers, transports, reconnaissance. Japanese factories produced 50 per day, 10-to-1 advantage, growing. American output increased monthly. Japanese output remained static as raw materials grew scarce. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea demonstrated what that imbalance meant operationally. 10 American aircraft for every Japanese aircraft. 100 American bombs for every Japanese bomb. Mathematics that no tactics could overcome. Pappy Gunn, promoted to major and decorated for his innovations, continued developing modifications. Later, B-25 variants incorporated 75mm cannon in addition to machine guns. Some strafers carried 18 guns total. The evolution continued throughout the war. Each modification built on lessons learned in combat. Each improvement traced back to that first skip bombing run against the Pruth. Simple technique, devastating application. The Pruth itself, that rusted wreck on a reef outside Port Moresby, bore evidence of its role. Hundreds of bomb impacts, whole sections blown away, thousands of .50 caliber rounds embedded in corroded steel. The ship that ran aground in 1924 had become the training ground for a revolution in naval warfare. Crews who practiced against that wreck went on to sink hundreds of Japanese vessels. The technique they learned there ended Japan's ability to reinforce by sea. Japanese naval doctrine never adapted effectively. They couldn't. The fundamental problem wasn't tactical. It was industrial. American factories could produce bombers faster than Japan could, build transports, could replace losses overnight, could sustain operations indefinitely. Japan could not match that arithmetic. By 1944, Japanese convoy operations had effectively ceased within range of Allied airfields. Submarines delivered supplies. Small craft moved at night. Neither method could sustain major garrisons. The defensive perimeter contracted steadily. Statistics from later operations confirmed the pattern. In 1942, before skip bombing, Japan moved 100,000 troops by sea successfully across the Southwest Pacific. In 1943, after the Bismarck Sea, that number dropped to 20,000. In 1944, 5,000. By 1945, maritime troop movements ceased entirely. Garrisons stood or fell based on resources already in place. No relief possible, no escape available. Skip bombing had closed the sea lanes permanently. The technique spread beyond the 5th Air Force. European theatre units studied the reports. Mediterranean squadrons adopted similar methods. By late 1943, skip bombing was standard doctrine in every theatre where Allied bombers operated against shipping. The innovation developed in Port Moresby, perfected against the Pruth, proven in the Bismarck Sea, had become universal practice. The legacy extended beyond World War II. Post-war aircraft development emphasized low-level attack capability. The Arton Thunderbolt, designed in the 1970s, carried similar forward-firing concentration. Modern anti-ship missiles use skip trajectories. The principle proven in 1943 remains valid. Low-level approach eliminates defensive response time. Precision matters more than explosive power. Simple techniques, properly executed, overcome complex defenses. For the Japanese Navy, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked the point where mathematics turned decisively against them. They could not defend convoys against skip bombing, could not replace losses, could not adapt doctrine fast enough. The war became a contest of industrial capacity, one they had already lost. The only question remaining was how long defeat would take. Admiral Kimura survived the battle. He commanded increasingly desperate operations through 1944. But he never forgot those 15 minutes over the Bismarck Sea, never forgot watching his convoy disintegrate, never forgot learning that everything the Imperial Navy taught about bomber defense was obsolete. In his post-war memoirs, he wrote, "We prepared for the wrong threat. We trained to counter high-altitude bombing. The Americans attacked from 50 feet. Our guns could not aim low enough. Our tactics were useless. We lost before we understood we were fighting a new kind of war." The Battle of the Bismarck Sea destroyed 8,000 tons of shipping and killed 3,000 men. But those numbers don't capture the revolution it represented, the proof that skip bombing worked, that medium bombers could sink ships more effectively than battleships, that innovation trumped tradition, that a technique practiced against a rusted wreck could change the course of the Pacific War. The mathematics were simple. 4% accuracy became 63%. Conventional bombing became skip bombing. Defeat became victory. All because someone asked the right question. How do we hit moving ships? And someone else provided the unconventional answer. Fly low. Very low. Let physics do the rest. Japan never knew, never could know, that their defensive doctrine was obsolete until it was tested in combat. By then, 6,900 men were at sea. By then, American crews had practiced the technique 40 times each. By then, the mathematics had already turned against them. They just didn't know it yet. The Pruth still rests on that reef outside Port Moresby, rusted, forgotten by most. But that wreck trained the crews who ended Japan's ability to fight at sea. That stationary target proved the technique that destroyed hundreds of ships. That practice range changed the Pacific War. Simple mathematics, devastating application. Revolution born from asking one question: what if we flew lower? Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.